Welcome, everybody. Look at all these people. Welcome to our first state-specific program series from the League of Women Voters Lake Michigan region. We're presenting topics of interest to the 4 different states related to preservation and protection of Lake Michigan. So welcome. We have four speakers today. This event today is part of our education committee's work, and the types of topics that are being presented today are also available through our speakers bureau that is available to provide speaking engagements for different groups around the 4 states around Lake Michigan. So I guess we can get started. Our first speaker is Joy Guscott-Mueller. She is our board chair for the Lake Michigan region, and she is going to present on climate change. And a little bio about Elizabeth Joy Guscott-Mueller. She's a managing partner of Guscott-Mueller Law, LLC in Chicago. Her practice includes environmental, real estate, estate planning, business litigation, and transactions. She's a member of U.S. District Court, Northern District Court of Illinois, Federal Trial Bar, and she volunteers on its pro bono panel representing indigent clients in employment discrimination and civil rights litigation. She serves as the president of LWV Lake Michigan Region, 4-state, 56-chapter interleague organization with a mission to protect and enhance Lake Michigan and its associated watershed. She's also a member of the LWV U.S. Climate Interest Group Steering Committee, serves as chair of the LWV U.S. Climate Interest Group Water Team. Past board work includes services as vice president of program and board secretary for a local league, and service as an issues specialist for the League of Women Voters Illinois Issues and Advocacy Committee. She also chairs the City of Lake Forest Legal Committee. Past community involvement includes service as a Lake Forest Elementary School Board member and in leadership for many nonprofit organizations. She holds a BA and JD degrees from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a Master's of Divinity from McCormick Theological Seminary in Hyde Park. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, it's great to see all of you folks here today, and thank you so much for joining us in this, our first Thursday in our state-specific program series. This program was developed as a result of a survey that we did to the state representatives on what issues were of most interest to folks in their state. And as a result, we developed this program. Climate change was in fact the issue that folks most wanted to hear about, but they also identified PFAS and coal ash and invasive species. So that's what you're going to hear about today. And we've tailored these. You'll learn general information, but we've also tailored them to the specific state. You all are welcome to register for and join us for the subsequent programs. We will be having one on each of the subsequent Thursdays, beginning at 7:30 Central, except for September 29th, when we will start at 6:30 Central, because we will be doing a program for Michigan, and they are on Eastern time. So that'll be 7:30 Eastern time on the 29th. So as Lisa indicated, we are an interleague organization of the League of Women Voters. We are comprised of the 4 states surrounding Lake Michigan: Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And we have local leagues within those states that are members of our organization. And if your local league is a member of that organization of LMR, then you are as well. And so we welcome your participation and volunteering. And I just want to take this brief moment to remind and announce to people that our annual meeting and conference is scheduled for October 21st and 22nd at the beautiful Blue Harbor Resort in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. We have our programs every 4 years at a different state, and this year Wisconsin is hosting. We have an exciting panel planned, and we will be opening registration tomorrow. And we have folks from the US EPA talking about areas of concern, a representative from NOAA, and a special guest that we will be confirming tomorrow. We're confirming the details of this person's participation. So look on our website tomorrow, and you'll also get a constant contact about it, and we hope you'll join us. And so, as Lisa indicated, our mission is to preserve and protect Lake Michigan and its adjacent watershed, and we educate and inform and engage in advocacy through our members. And so this program is really relevant to that mission and satisfies our mission to educate folks. And so let's begin. And I'm going to share my screen, so if you'll bear with me for a minute while I get that squared away. And I am going to have to do what Rosemary said I shouldn't do, which is share my whole screen, because we have two presentations up on this machine. So we're going to take this down.
That looks perfect. Joy, take a look.
Oh, it's on one row. It's the PFAS one. So I'm going to, we practice this, but it's going to give us trouble. So here we go. All right. I'm going to do this, and we're ready to start. So we're going to talk about climate change today, and I'm going to talk about the climate change threats to water and Lake Michigan specifically. Now, the assumption that water is both available and safe to drink may not be true in the future. And indeed, in my work with the LWVUS climate change group water team, we have members from all the different watersheds throughout the United States. And for some folks, it's a reality now. There is not enough available and safe water to drink. And so we have such a precious resource here with the Great Lakes and with all of us, Lake Michigan specifically. And so it's important to us, the impacts of climate change on water. So across the US, we are seeing unprecedented high water levels and erosion in the Great Lakes. See, back. You can see on the left-hand side, there's Lake Michigan and eroding beach there, very little beach there. And I know that's a familiar sight to many of you who spend time on the lake, especially on the Indiana and Michigan side. Although we have a little more beach this season, 2 or 3 seasons ago, at least in our experience. We have a house in Michigan as well as Illinois, and we experienced virtually no beach. And so we're experiencing that here. Across the US, we also see rising sea levels and resulting floods and saltwater intrusion in coastal areas. We also see growing intensity and frequency of severe weather events. For instance, high heat, rainstorms, and hurricanes. This is a graphic that was presented by Tom Skilling at our Climate Change Forum in April of this year. And here Tom shows us how temperatures continue to rise, and that 2021 ties 2018 for the 6th warmest year on record. And you can see the impact of the rising temperatures. Intergovernmental on Climate estimates that most climate change impacts will be connected to water. Those impacts are drought, floods, unreliable water supplies, and poor water quality. And of course, you probably recognize that as Lake Erie and the eutrophication that is being shown in the center. So, and will continue to experience ecosystem devastation, according to the IPCC. Example of climate change impacts throughout the country and here in the Midwest include climate-related changes to rainfall, causing drought and water scarcity in some areas and taxing farmers, and flooding in others. This persistent drought and lack of water where it occurs stresses trees and causes increased temperatures, and that exacerbates wildfires. Too much rainfall in some regions cutting, worse along coastlines by the sea level rise, and pushes the water table higher. And again, you see that in this graphic, a reflection of satellite data from 1993 to the present, showing a 3.3 rate of change. The rise in ground level impacts septic systems, gas lines, building foundations, and more. And so here you see the result of groundwater level rise that's disrupted the, reached the septic system. And then of course, runoff from fires and flooding can carry pollutants, debris, and contaminants into waterways, including our drinking water sources. So specifically, the climate change impacts on Lake Michigan, what are they? Well, we have more extreme Lake Michigan water levels, as I mentioned before. And we have higher water levels plus stronger winds and heavier storms, increasing the height of waves and the intensity of waves. This results in erosion, beach loss, and damage to shoreline residential, commercial, and industrial areas. It also causes risks to communities and Lake Michigan itself from shoreline sites with toxic materials. Here are some of impacts from Indiana shoreline sites, which we'll be focused on tonight briefly, and address other sites in the other states in subsequent programs. I commend to you for your consideration and viewing the Rising Waters report from the Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago. They are one of our organizations with whom we coordinate, and we sign on to some of their letters that they send to legislators. They do great work, and they came out this year with this Rising Waters report. And what they identify for Indiana shoreline problems is two sites: the State Line coal plant in Hammond. This is for those, most of you in Indiana, you know, this was a former coal plant on the lakeshore. It's in a precarious position, and coal ash was a byproduct of the coal plant operations, and much of that was dumped on site. And Susan will be talking about this a little later, but coal ash leaches heavy metals into soil and water, for instance, lead, arsenic, cadmium, and chromium. And although a great deal of it was removed, it's believed that the site still poses a risk to Lake Michigan due to remaining coal ash. And the reason it's a risk is because of rising lake levels and waves resulting from the extreme weather. Although some of this coal ash is located not in the water, but on the shore, with the rising lake levels, it mobilizes that coal ash that would otherwise be immobilized. And that's how it gets into the groundwater and then also back into the lake. The other site that they reference and discuss is the US Steelworks site in Gary. And I'm sure most of you folks from Indiana know that they are operating an industrial facility on the lake shore. And it has been identified by the US EPA as a large quantity generator of hazardous waste. So again, heavy metals, VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, and PCBs, which are polychlorinated biphenyls. Also a problem is mercury and dioxin. And specifically, there's an example from 2019 where you had the flooding in Indiana and the facility released mercury into the Grand Calumet River, which really caused a terrible pollution problem in that river. And indeed, the report by ELPC indicates that although the barriers between the steelworks and the lake seem to be stable, the concern is that the rising lake levels and those high waves again with extreme weather are going to essentially breach that and present a risk to Lake Michigan of mercury effluent from the site. So pretty significant problems, and these are just two of the examples of risks to Lake Michigan. So in part of the country, it has become apparent that 20th century strategies for managing water no longer make sense in the face of climate change. So what to do? We don't want you to leave depressed tonight. And so if you're not already a member, join the League of Women Voters and encourage your local league to join or renew its membership in LWV Lake Michigan region. As we said, we're focused on education of folks, and we have many programs the year. And they're not only open to members, but they are open to the public and to friends. And so we encourage you to visit our website and take advantage of those. We also engage in advocacy. So with regard to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we started signing onto letters at the subcommittee level in Congress and took our sign-ons all the way through to passage of the legislation. And as a result, $1 billion increase, we not only retained the funds for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, there was an increase in $1 billion. So we do quite a bit of advocacy in this area. And then finally, I suggest to you, and we'll put it in the chat, to sign up for the LWV US Climate Change Google group. This is a group that has vibrant conversations about climate change, and our interest group is divided up into several sub-teams that deal with things like renewable energy or water, which is the team that I chair, or oceans, because that's a separate area that we focus on. And so many different areas. You will learn a lot from the Google group. It's great discussion, and I suggest you take a look at that. Locally, ask legislators and candidates how they plan to use funds received from the bipartisan infrastructure bill. With regard to water management, are they investing in gray infrastructure or green infrastructure? So are they investing in concrete, or are they investing in native plants and different type permeable pavers, different types of green infrastructure? And finally, are they evaluating shoreline projects in light of climate change risks? That's for you folks living near or on the water. And educate your local officials and community members by holding an educational on 23 approach to water conservation or stormwater management. And here you can see one of our resources, which is the watershed model that can circulate throughout the region. If you or one of your groups wants to use it, we can train you on it and show you how it works and let you educate folks through that. We also have materials that you can find on the website on growing native plants, nature's water treatment plants. That's from a grant that the organization received during Krista Grimm's tenure as president, and she's one of our speakers today. And finally, advocate. Advocate for your local officials to pass and enforce building and permitting codes that encourage sustainable use, conservation, and management appropriate to your local watershed. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa. Thank you so much for your attention, and we're just delighted to have you here with us. Lisa?
Thank you, Joy. That was a great presentation. Thank you for that. A reminder to please put your questions in the chat, and we will address those at the end of after all four speakers have presented. So our next speaker, Krista Grimm, has been a board member of the League of Women Voters Lake Michigan region for 12 years. She previously served for 4 years as board president. She is an urban planner concerned with clean water and ecosystems. She lives in a western suburb of Chicago and is a founder of and serves as commissioner on her village's Sustainability Commission. So with that, Krista is going to present about invasive species. Thank you, Krista.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so as Lisa said, I'm going to talk about invasive species. And especially with this topic, I am going to try to focus on Indiana a little bit, but and it is true that state boundaries do extend into the lake, but the living organisms in the ecosystem, are pretty much oblivious to them. So states are really less, it's less germane when we're talking about invasive species. The problem is ecosystem wide. Now, I can't get this to advance. There we go. Okay, so in the United States and Canada entered into the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement in 2012. And so each country has a legal obligation to prevent the spread of invasive species. And that pertains both to aquatic and terrestrial. So what does it mean? When we're talking about invasive species, we're really talking about two different categories of organisms. First, non-native organisms. And those are species that are not found in the ecosystem. It's a little circular thinking because you only have a non-native species if they are indeed in the ecosystem, but they would not have been there naturally. They come from a different country or a different region of the United States. Invasive species are non-native species that harm or has the potential to harm the ecosystem. So this is kind of, it may be obvious, but you cannot have an invasive species until you have a large enough population of non-native species to affect the ecosystem. So we really need to prevent the non-native species and not worry about so much about which ones are already harming our ecosystem, because it is cheaper to prevent the problem than to solve problems. And sometimes it's impossible to get rid of these invasive species. So we're really concerned about the species that have established communities that are able to reproduce. There are 188 non-native species in the Great Lakes that have been identified. 64 of those have been determined to be invasive. And it's quite interesting. The federal government goes through a very, very rigorous scientific study of the different species to determine which ones are actually qualify as invasive. This chart starts back in 1840, and you can see that the number of invasive species really increased pretty rapidly over time, but that around 1960, the number started to increase even more quickly, and until around 2000. And it's kind of leveled off in the last few years. And the number one cause of invasive species, or I'm sorry, non-native species, we have to be specific when we talk about them, is ballast water. So in Lake Michigan itself, there are approximately 140 non-native species. So another distinction that needs to be made are those species that are on land and those that are aquatic. So mostly, right in the lake or on the lake shore. And 97 of those non-natives are considered aquatic species. So of the aquatic non-native species in Lake Michigan, we can see that the biggest groups are plants, fish, crustaceans, algae, and mollusks. But there are other types of creatures or living organisms that are of concern as well, like worms, bacteria, viruses, insects. So that just gives you an idea of the kinds of species that are present. So I looked at what the USGS has identified as some of the non-native species in Indiana. And this was from a listing specifically of only the aquatic species. And I picked these 4 just to show that they are widespread in the state and in different watersheds, and invasive species are everywhere, in other words. So Phragmites are in every different watershed and environment. Flathead catfish were found in Indiana Dunes National Seashore. The USGS has not updated its database to reflect the seashore becoming a national park. Yellow flag iris at present in Indiana Dunes State Park, and red algae is a problem in Lake Calumet. And that's an interesting species because that algae actually grows over the winter. So I don't know much about it, but I thought it was really interesting. So how are we doing in terms of controlling the number of invasive and non-native species in the Great Lakes ecosystem? And so this part of the presentation pertains to the whole ecosystem, not Lake Michigan specifically. The US EPA in Canada put out a State of the Great Lakes assessment report, and this is from this year's report. They rated that the number of new species is good and unchanging. So the ballast water regulations that were put in starting around 2006 and inspections of the transoceanic ships, which are sometimes called the salties because they travel over in saltwater, those regulations have been very, very helpful in reducing the number of new species in the ecosystem. Since 2011, well, between 2011 and 2020, 4 new species have become established. They're all zooplankton. They have identified that zebra and quagga mussels and Phragmites are still spreading. So those are, some of the species that are of the largest concern. And the sea lamprey population, the control measures for sea lamprey, which I know some of it is taking place in Indiana, that it has been very successful. They estimated it suppressed the population by 90%. And the other thing is that we need to recognize that species can spread within and between the lakes. In terms of the impact of non-native species and invasive species, the 2 governments have deemed the impact as poor, a poor effect on the ecosystem. And then they are changing their methodology in how they're going to determine how they're going to make this ranking on impact. So for this year, they did not give a, they didn't rank it. So they called it undetermined. So, you shouldn't think that they don't know what's going on. It's just that that's what they did for this year. Okay, and then here are some more specific information from that same report for the different lakes. And if we look at the Lake Michigan is the second column among the lakes. So for the rate of new aquatic non-indigenous species, the federal government and Canada jointly agree that the situation is fair and improving. So that is compares favorably to some of the other lakes, as you can see, which are colored red there. For sea lamprey, they consider that situation good and improving. So that's getting better. For the mussels, they rate that poor and deteriorating. So as far as the mussels go for Lake Michigan, they found that really we have a growing population of quagga mussels, more so than the zebra mussels in Lake Michigan, and that the situation is stable or getting better in the nearshore waters and the mid-level waters, but these mussels are moving into the deeper parts of the lake, and so that's very concerning. So, so this is recent developments in terms of how we're trying to address invasive species. A lot of planning and development takes place at the state level or might be among local researchers. And so there's a lot of information that's collected, but for the first time, it was put together in the Great Lakes Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Information System, which is GLANCIS. So we've added a new acronym to our Great Lakes, our language, our lingo, that you should know, GLANCIS. So this is a website, and it has collected all of the different studies done on the different species, on the tools that different states are using to try to deal with these problems, and also interactive maps. So you can go and say, like, if you're interested in a specific geographic area, you can pinpoint it and see what's present there. So this is a great way to share information across the ecosystem. Recently, last year, Canada adopted ballast regulations for the Lakers. These are the ships that just operate within the Great Lakes. And these regulations are going to become effective in 2024. Earlier this year, the Congress asked for a study of what the impact of this would be on our shipping industry in the United States. And, it's a very in-depth study, but the bottom line is that Congress did not act on this. They did not change anything in terms of, like, they're not going to complain to Canada about this. But the Great Lakes Carriers Association does oppose it because it's going to increase their costs. And then in 2018, the US Congress adopted or passed legislation that was signed into law for the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. And so this is kind of the United States' version of how we're dealing with inland barges. So the EPA is going to determine standards. They published them in 2020. They have not yet been adopted. The Coast Guard will eventually implement and enforce them. And a couple of things, there's a new program, another new program. This acronym is unpronounceable, I believe, but it's the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain Invasive Species Program. And it was funded $50 million per year for 5 years. They did use GLRI funds that was criticized. Some people thought that it should get its own funding, this program. And it is helpful because this is studying ways to deal with preventing non-native species. Okay, So in terms of possible things that our governments could be doing better in the future, one thing is that if Canada is going to have these ballast regulations for the Lakers, it would make sense for the United States to have similar regulations. So that's something that may be coming up in the future. And I would watch for that. I've heard talk about that domestically already. And another thing is to improve the alignment and coordination of regional efforts. So we have this new database, but still there are differences on the state level. So you can see in this chart, the number of species, of non-native species that the different states are prohibiting from entering. And if you just focus on the navy blue bars, the darkest ones, you can see that some states and Canadian territories are controlling many, many more species than others. And Indiana is the second lowest among them. Although Pennsylvania Pennsylvania is the fewest. Indiana is the next. And then Illinois and Quebec is not too much further, and Ontario are not too much further behind. So that's another thing where there could be more alignment between the states. The Great Lakes Advisory Board sent a report to the EPA earlier this year, and they had a number of recommendations for things that can be done. And some of them are things that are underway, I have to say. One thing that they noted was that a lot of our spending on efforts to prevent and deal with non-native species, a lot of the money is going to the three big species, and that's Asian carp, Phragmites, and mussels. And so they recommended, spreading out the money to other species as well. But I just want to, because Asian carp is the biggest user of the money, I thought I'd talk about this as well at the end here. So what about the COPE? And you may have heard of this, but Illinois is trying to remarket or rebrand, I should say, the marketing of Asian carp, because they believe that if there's more commercial fishing of the carp from the Illinois River, we can get the biomass of Asian carp down. Currently, it's 70% of the biomass in the Illinois River, and they want to get that, have less pressure on the amount of carp coming north and potentially into Lake Michigan. You know that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is working on putting in a barrier, a multi-functional barrier for the Asian carp as a supplement to what's already at the Brandon Road area near Joliet, Illinois. And so that $850 million project is still in design and pre-construction. The US Senate this year increased the federal cost share of construction to 90% in the Water Resources and Development Act, which they passed on July 28th. That has to go to reconciliation with the House. So that hasn't happened yet, but that would be great because the funding for the project has been a big holdup. And then in recent weeks, a large Asian carp was captured 7 miles from Lake Michigan in Lake Calumet, which is concerning. And, through another vector, a silver carp eDNA was found in Lake Erie in July, and no one really knows what that means. So this is still an issue. There's still pressure, and this project is ongoing. And with that, I have to thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Another very informative presentation. These are all such important issues. Thank you for that. Again, please offer your questions in the chat so we can address them afterwards. Our next presenter, David Mueller. David is a partner in the law firm Guscott-Mueller Law, LLC, with offices in Lake Forest and Chicago, Illinois. And he has over 30 years experience in environmental, OSHA, health and safety, and real estate. His environmental work has spanned in-house, large law firm, governmental, public interest, and consulting. Mr. Mueller has litigated a wide variety of environmental and safety issues before state and federal courts and administrative bodies throughout the country, including CERCLA, Superfund, cost recovery and enforcement actions, toxic tort and asbestos suits, insurance coverage claims for environmental liabilities, OSHA citations, proceedings and pollution enforcement, variance, permit appeal and rulemaking proceedings. He has also managed major industrial facility closures, decommissioning, remediation, sale, and redevelopment throughout the world. Mr. Mueller received a BS from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and Environment, where he was a member of the National Forestry Honor Society, Xi Sigma Pi. He received his JD from DePaul University College of Law and was a visiting student at the University of Illinois College of Law. He's a member of the Illinois-Wisconsin in-house and federal bars. So with that, David will be presenting on PFAS. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Lisa. We're just trying to get the screen up. There we go. We'll make the magic happen. Thanks to you. And hope this is the, okay. So yeah, what's the problem with PFAS? People are starting to hear about this. And so this is kind of a primer on we'll talk about a little chemistry. We'll talk a little bit about law, and we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Indiana. So, so what are PFAS? Well, PFAS are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're a very large sort of family of almost 5,000 different fluorinated compounds, and they're synthesized, meaning these are molecules that are not naturally occurring. They've been invented, and they're used for their stable, unreactive properties in numerous products, from stain resistance to firefighting foams. So their basic chemistry is that they have these, I'm gonna just give you a picture of a PFAS molecule. They have these long carbon chains, that's the black part, and they have, they're usually fully or partially fluorinated. And what this chemical structure does is it makes them very stable, because carbon molecules are very strong, and the bonds are very strong. And they're also, because you've got these fluorines that are really covering all the carbon receptors, they don't react with other chemicals, and so they're stable. They are able to, they're chemically non-reactive. They don't react with other chemicals, and they're thermally stable and chemically stable. So then have a other sort of capabilities that make them very useful for a lot of different applications. So they also have surfactant properties. If you think about what happens in a dishwasher to make things kind of slippery and clean. But all of these properties, well, it makes them useful for products and processes. It makes them very, what's called recalcitrant in the environment. These properties make them widespread in the environment, but also very difficult to treat or remediate. So they spread when they're released into the environment, and they stay there. They hang around. So and up till now, they really have not been regulated in any meaningful way. So for all these reasons, they've been called emerging contaminants due to their widespread use in many different types of products, their mobility and stability in the environment. They hang around, and the lack of regulation. So there's been an increasing interest and concern in them. So as I said, there are thousands of compounds, and they're very chemically complex. Even what we call them, what we call chemical nomenclature, naming, has been unclear and inconsistent, and the subject of even dispute and fights between chemists. So they're also very difficult to chemically test for. and they require very special sampling, analysis, and actually special labs. You can't have these analyzed just at any laboratory. And so because of all this special testing requirement, what that means is, and the fact that they were never regulated, they really weren't on our radar screen, and none of the existing raw data sets that say we've developed at cleanup sites for decades, none of those raw data sets are useful for assessing PFAS. You won't find them there. And the other problem here is there have been multiple generations of products manufactured since World War II. This was kind of the boom of synthetic chemical creation and production. So while much of the focus has been on the older long chain compounds that are no longer made, new short chain replacement compounds have been formulated, and we're not quite sure if those are problematic or not. There's just not a lot of data, not a lot of toxicity data, just not a lot of data. So, and this is just an example. This is a sheet from the TSDR, which is the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry. And this is a federal agency, part of the CDC, that assesses chemical hazards, particularly those associated with Superfund sites. This is the sort of a family chemical tree of all the different PFAS compounds, just as an illustration of how many there are and how complex and interrelated but different their chemistry is. So each one of these chemicals can have a different toxicological profile, meaning that some of them are more harmful than others. So wide variety, almost 5,000 of these types of compounds. So PFAS were useful and widely used. I talked about their stability, both thermally and chemically. What that means is you could put this stuff into firefighting foam, and you could throw it on an 1800 to 2000 degree Fahrenheit jet fuel fire, and the foam would put out the fire. So it was very effective. It became the military procured this and put a spec out for this in the 1960s because they needed this type of product for firefighting in the primarily in the aviation area. So what are some of the PFAS containing products? Where are they found? What kind of products are they in? Well, they're in firefighting foam. They're in paper and packaging. They're in clothing and carpeting. If you think about Scotchgard, was PFAS. Outdoor textile and sporting equipments, waterproofing, waterproofing of leather goods, ski and snowboard wax. Once again, those slippery properties. Non-stick cookware, Teflon, the old Teflon stuff. Throw out your old Teflon pans. They're not really appropriate to use anymore. Cleaning agents, polishes, wax, latex paints, hydraulic fluid because it could withstand a lot of high temperature and pressure. Once again, that chemical stability. Adhesives. Think of the 3M sticky notes, the little yellow sticky notes that we all fell in love with and used for decades. That ability to release that stickiness and then that slipperiness that allows those sheets to be pulled off, that was due to PFAS. And in personal care products, shampoo, conditioner, sunscreen, cosmetics, once again, these surfactant qualities, toothpaste and floss, once again, something slippery between your teeth. So very useful, but kind of short-sighted. So they were also, because of these unique properties, they were used in industrial and manufacturing processes. So they were used to make textiles and leather, for waterproofing, paper products, metal plating, electroplating and etching, wire manufacturing, resins, molds, plastics. They were good releasing agents if you were molding something. and you wanted it to separate after the mold. That slippery quality was very useful. And photolithography, semiconductor industry. So where are PFAS found now that they've been released? Well, we find them at the chemical manufacturing plants that actually made the PFAS chemicals. We find them at the PFAS containing product manufacturing sites, such as Wolverine Shoe and Boot Company in Michigan, where they were waterproofing their leather boots. That has a very significant PFAS issue in near Muskegon. Landfills, landfill leachate, landfill gas, wastewater treatment plants and sludges and filters, military installations, airports, firefighting training locations where firefighters learn to use this great foam, firefighting infrastructure, sort of the tanks and vessels and equipment that were used to spread the foam, and then historic fire areas where these had actually been used in fires. Fuel terminals, petrochemical facilities, it's pretty clear as to why they would be used there. Waste streams, surface water, groundwater, soils, and you and me. California study found PFAS in 9 out of 10 people tested. So we all carry, almost all of us, carry a PFAS burden of some sort. And then TBD, because we're just learning about these chemicals, we're still finding them in interesting and surprising places. So, okay, this is just a kind of a map of PFAS military sites. You can see a lot of them around the Great Lakes. It's one of the reasons that I think a lot of people in the Great Lakes area are interested in them. This is PFAS impacted sites. These are community and water systems. So these are impacted sites. Once again, we have a big cluster around Michigan. Now that's data is probably skewed a little bit because Michigan was one of the first states to really address PFAS and do a lot of sampling and drill down on this problem. So you probably have this type of concentration in a lot of other locations. Michigan just looks worse, but that's because they were working on this problem so much longer than any other state. So, so PFAS, what is really the problem with them? Well, are being developed, they have toxic qualities. So regulations are being developed rapidly throughout many states and more recently at the federal level. In 2018, ATSDR issued a toxicological profile, and that provides the technical basis for regulating these. You just can't, you have to regulate them at a particular level. What we're finding is that they are toxic at a part per trillion or PPT level. And that's where the standards are being developed. So, and that's really tiny, that's really small. For example, most contaminant standards that we work with for things like lead or benzene or chlorinated solvents are in the part per million or part per billion level. Part per trillion is an order of magnitude smaller than a part per billion. Now, what's a part per billion? Kind of the rule of thumb, the great way to illustrate it is you took an Olympic swimming pool size full of water and you put 1 drop of the chemical into that pool, that would be a part per billion. So part per trillion is once again an order of magnitude small. To detect that some of our equipment is unable to detect it at the level of concern. So if you find it, it's probably over, you know, a health standard. Sampling, as I said, was difficult and expensive, and so little data exists because we haven't really been aware of it. It's highly mobile and persistent in the environment. It's sort of this weird combination. Because PFAS, as I said, are highly stable, they don't break down chemically, and yet they're also highly mobile. They're very soluble in water, meaning they dissolve in water readily. And this is an unusual combination. For example, PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, are very stable and persistent, but they're not mobile. They're really heavy and they're not soluble. Organic solvents like dry cleaning solvent, perk, that sort of thing, are very mobile, but they're unstable. They do degrade readily, either by evaporation or by biological breakdown. So with PFAS, we sort of have the worst of both worlds. And this also makes them difficult to remediate or clean up. Conventional treatment methods such as bioremediation and volatilization are not really effective to achieve these very low cleanup standards. And as I said, public awareness is growing, and we really are playing catch up here. We are behind the curve in understanding all aspects of the PFAS problem. Okay, there we go. So mobility and persistence, I talked about, fate and transfer in the environment. PFAS contaminated groundwater plumes are much larger and longer than conventional contamination plumes, such as gasoline plumes or chlorinated solvent plumes, such as from a dry cleaning solvent. A gasoline plume, BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene, average approximately 200 feet before they degrade and attenuate in the environment. Chlorinated ethenes are a little more persistent. They average about 1,000 feet before they degrade. PFAS plumes, on the other hand, average about 6.2 miles due to their persistence, their mobility, and the low part per trillion level that are of concern. So this is a map, a view of a PFAS plume in Escoda, Michigan, which is a former Air Force base. And so this is a pretty hole. If you notice that sort of lozenge shaped, oblong shape, that's the runway of the Air Force base. So we're talking a big distance, and the darker colors indicate higher level, much higher level plume concentrations, and then you get into the pinks, and those are lower concentrations. But this is huge. I mean, this is miles and miles of plume that's represented here. So it's pretty wild. This is kind of a thematic of PFOA mobility in the environment. It can be airborne, and you can have aerosol land deposition from airborne PFAS. You can get it in the soils, into the groundwater, and that can in turn get into the bedrock. So very mobile. So what's the regulatory history? How did we get here? Well, in 1976, the Toxic Substance Control Act, or TSCA, was passed, and it was to deal with the assessment of new chemicals for their toxicity before they're introduced into the stream of commerce. But it grandfathered in about 62,000 existing chemicals, including PFAS. So that's how we got here. In the early 2000s, the manufacturers of PFAS negotiated a voluntary ban on manufacture of this early generation long-term chain PFAS, including the firefighting foam, because they were becoming acutely aware of the toxicity and the problems associated with that. So it's been identified as a likely carcinogen, and Lifetime Health Advisory, which isn't a regulation but is an advisory of 70 parts per trillion, was put forward during the Obama administration, and recently in 2022 was significantly lowered. In 2018, as I said, a toxicological profile was established by ATSDR. The Trump administration didn't really do much in this area. They had a PFAS summit in 2018, which sort of made a laundry list of things they needed to do, but they didn't really do any of them. As soon as Biden was elected, the EPA developed and issued in early 2021 a PFAS strategic roadmap. And the Biden administration has embarked on a new and aggressive strategy. So let's talk about that. So the Biden administration has decided. What? You advanced it. There we go. Okay. Biden administration said that we need a whole of agency response. And so they pulled together a group, made a PFAS like steering committee, a council from all different EPA programs. And so the idea here is to consider the life cycle of PFAS and get upstream of the problem, sort of what we should have done with TSCA in the first place. Hold polluters accountable, ensure science-based decision-making, and prioritize protection of disadvantaged communities, the environmental justice priority of the administration. So recent US EPA actions. I'm gonna go from the bottom up to the top. In December, they increased drinking water monitoring, Clean Water Act. They put out a draft aquatic life criteria, and they started to mandate that when NPDES, which is the discharge permitting under the Clean Water Act program, now needed to consider PFAS. 5 PFAS compounds were added to the risk-based values for contaminated. And then this year, and things really started to hit. In June 2022, we got $1 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure bill to fund and address emerging contaminants in drinking water, including PFAS. The EPA issued a first test order under TSCA for manufacturers, which is the first step in developing really uniform national testing and toxicity data. We've got to get the data. And in June, they issued 4 new drinking water health advisories, significantly lowering them, but almost by an order of magnitude from earlier 70 part per trillion level. And then just in August, they proposed that hazardous substance definition under Superfund, CERCLA, and RCRA designate PFOA and PFAS. So what that does, it brings them into the federal cleanup jurisdiction so that we can now use federal Superfund monies and impose liability for PFAS chemicals under those existing programs. So let's talk a little bit about the Indiana experience with PFAS. Indiana, unlike some states like Michigan, Michigan really led the parade on this and developed standards very early. Some states have not done that. Illinois has not, Indiana has not. So there's no state level standards being developed, and Indiana is going to be relying on the feds to do standard development. They did have started to conduct a PFAS sampling project for community water systems. These are systems that service between above 15 to 25 people. And there are 3 phases of sampling presently being conducted from February 2021 to May 2023. We're in the 2nd phase. It's being done by size of community water systems. And phase 2 will end in December of 2022. And so, we learn new things every time we get more data. So the road forward: collect the data, do the science, promulgate the regulations, maximize the value of federalism and the state's roles to date, because Michigan did a lot of good work in leading the parade on this. And it's good to see that it's important, though, that we establish uniform federal health-based numbers so that we just don't have 50 different states with 50 different approaches on this, because it's the same risk. So, and then bring the PFAS chemicals into the federal cleanup and permitting jurisdiction. And so those things are all chugging along, and we've made a lot of progress in 2 years. So, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Another important issue to look at and keep track of, see what's going on out there with PFAS. Thank you for that presentation. So our final speaker today, Susan Thomas, is with the Just Transition Northwest Indiana, which was launched in part to ensure clean closure of the NIPSCO Michigan City plant, remove toxic coal ash waste, and help with that issue. Susan is a legislative and policy director and press secretary for Just Transition Northwest Indiana. A former environmental trend analyst, Susan holds a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University. During her time in Chicago, she also worked as an actor, focusing on community outreach and social justice issues. She lives in Beverly Shores, Indiana, the heart of the Indiana Dunes National Park, and co-chairs the Association of Beverly Shores Residents Environmental Committee. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Good evening. So happy to be here and learning a tremendous amount from all of these wonderful presentations. So let's just dive right in. Welcome to Indiana. We're winning. We have the most toxic emissions per square mile than any state in the US. That is Indiana. In terms of coal ash, which is what I'm specifically going to discuss, Indiana has 86 toxic coal ash ponds, or pits, as we like to call them, and 13 landfills. Most of these are unlined, which means they're leaching into the groundwater and into our rivers, streams, and lakes, and they are on all major waterways in Indiana. So with that note of gloom and doom, we'll try and keep it upbeat. We'll keep it positive at the end. We're going to move forward with our presentation. So let's move to the next slide. So we've been around for 2 years, and we're really focused on environmental justice in the region. Northwest Indiana is home of tremendous amount of industry, as you're all aware. And these are communities surrounding industry are mostly poor, Black and brown, and they are the ones that get continuously dumped on and really feel the major brunt of all of this pollution. So we are trying to educate the community, bring folks together, and move toward more of a community-based way of doing things, where it's not industry versus environmentalism. You can't have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. And for too long, politicians and, it's just been like commonly spewed out that, it's either the environment or the economy. That is patently false. Both, they are interdependent, and we must start focusing on that message. So let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so we borrowed this slide from Climate Justice Alliance. We use it a lot. This is a really fantastic chart graph to explain what is a just transition. A lot of people are not familiar with that term, but it's moving away from fossil fuels into an economy that is just, that is fair for workers, that is fair for folks living in these communities. And when we look at the economy that we have now is what's called an extractive economy. In other words, dig, burn, and dump. And you can see from this wonderful circle, all the different cycles that it feeds. What we're trying to do is move over to a regenerative economy where we have well-being, where we have cooperation, caring for one another, and above all, for our governance, we have deep democracy where everyone's voice is valued, everyone's voice is heard, and we need to move away from the extractive economy, from the top down, international down to the local. And there's a tremendous amount that starts at the local level, grassroots, so important. So let's move to the next slide, please. Now, this is a video that we made with our partners, the NAACP in LaPorte County, the Hoosier Environmental Council, and the Northwest Indiana Ministers Conference, as well as the law firm Earth Justice. What this is a synopsis of what's happening in Michigan City. So go ahead, start. Oh, and you know what? Before you hit the play, I want you all to observe the waves. This is a low wave day. So circling back to Elizabeth Joy's presentation about erosion, in Beverly Shores, we had so much erosion, it washed away, it almost washed away a road, it took away a parking lot. Homes were in grave jeopardy. As you know, in Chicago, the whole lakefront path got devastated. So this is a very serious issue. And Howard Lerner at the ELPC, his report on this was really, really significant. So as we watch this, just look at what's happening on a low wave day and know that we have ferocious waves happening in the spring and in the fall that crest this wall continuously. So go ahead, let's watch this video.
Is the toxic waste left after burning coal. It contains dangerous contaminants such as arsenic, lead, and mercury. Coal ash is linked to asthma, reproductive problems, heart disease, cancer, and death. The Michigan City Power Plant, located on the shore of Lake Michigan in Indiana, started burning coal in 1931, and it has been producing coal ash ever since. Michigan City, which is right next to the plant, a place where people's health is sacrificed for the benefit of polluting industry or to benefit more affluent groups. This is the Michigan City site from above in 2021. There are about 2 million tons of coal ash buried at the site, and that coal ash is being held out of Lake Michigan by an aging, leaking steel sea wall. With this drone footage, we get a different view of the plant. Starting at the corner next to Trail Creek, where buildings and parking lots were built on top of coal ash from the 1930s and 40s. Here we see the waste pits that were built on top of coal ash from the 1950s and 60s. This area was part of Lake Michigan until coal ash and sand was used to fill in behind the seawall. At the edge of the water, there are 2 steel seawalls. Though the outer wall is barely visible above the water, even small waves easily wash over the
Susan, is the video not showing? Because Lisa said the video's not showing.
My screen is frozen.
Okay. I tried expanding the video. Everybody, I'm sorry for this interruption. I'm gonna stop this. I tried expanding, the YouTube video to fill the screen, and I think I might have messed it up. So let me try again. I think I'll go right back to your original, in a minute. I don't think I'll do that. I'm gonna go to your original slideshow. There, okay. And then I'll start this video again, and I won't mess with it.
Okay.
It is okay
No
to
worries.
be so stressed and
It's a short
overwhelmed
video.
that you feel like you need to talk to someone about it. And by that, I mean go.
Coal ash is the toxic waste left after burning coal. It contains dangerous contaminants such as arsenic, lead, and mercury. Coal ash is linked to asthma, reproductive problems, heart disease, cancer, and death. The Michigan City Power Plant, located on the shore of Lake Michigan in Indiana, started burning coal in 1931, and it has been producing coal ash ever since. Michigan City, which is right next to the plant, has been treated as a sacrifice zone, a place where people's health is sacrificed for the benefit of polluting industry or to benefit more affluent groups. This is the Michigan City site from above in 2021. There are about 2 million tons of coal ash buried at the site, and that coal ash is being held out of Lake Michigan by an aging, leaking steel sea wall. With this drone footage, we get a different view of the plant. starting at the corner next to Trail Creek, where buildings and parking lots were built on top of coal ash from the 1930s and 40s. Here we see the waste pits that were built on top of coal ash from the 1950s and 60s. This area was part of Lake Michigan until coal ash and sand was used to fill in behind the seawall. At the edge of the water, there are two steel seawalls. Though the outer wall is barely visible above the water, even small waves easily wash over the outer wall. The lake's water level has been rising in recent years. The high water and waves increase the risk of the seawall failing. Here we see parts of the seawall are missing and falling.
Did you want to speak, Susan, instead of trying to struggle with
Yeah,
it?
let's just go to the next slide.
Yeah.
There, I believe there's a link. Yes, thank you. Rosemary put the link in the chat, and it's worth it to go back and check it out. It's only a 5-minute video. So
Yeah,
let's continue on.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what.
No worries, no worries.
Thank you.
So what we have done, we just realized like we had to get the legislation on board because they really did not even know about this issue, or perhaps turned a blind eye to this issue. So we introduced 2 years ago legislation to start properly excavating the coal ash, moving it out of the floodplain to higher ground, and putting it into properly lined pits where it is high and dry. And our state senator at the time, Karen Talion, said, if you write the bill, I'll present it. And we had 3 days. This was 3 days before Thanksgiving. We had 3 days to meet the deadline. And because COVID hit, none of us were really going to a family festival for Thanksgiving. And between, our own little turkey family celebrations, we hammered out a bill and got it in on the deadline. And that became the first bill introduced into the Indiana State Legislature. It didn't go anywhere, but we started the process of educating our state house as to what is coal ash, how big of a problem it is in Indiana. And last year, we worked again with with Representative Pat Boy and our new Senator Rodney Pohl, and we pushed it again. And every year we are making strides. This last session, we got 2 Republican sponsors, which was huge. Unfortunately, didn't pass again, but they're starting to hear us, and they're starting to say, oh, send that report again. So we are making strides. We're going to push for it again. We are working at the local level. We've had several community meetings, health forums. We had a big rally opposing a rate hike. NIPSCO they still want to raise the ratepayer hikes to pay for this excavation. Unfortunately, they are calling it a complete excavation. So they're trying to greenwash the public into believing that they're cleaning up the entire site on Lake Michigan. What is in truth is that they are leaving behind perhaps more than 2 million tons of toxic coal ash literally on the lake. And they have no plan to remove it, even though they are going to be closing down the plant. So they're leaving a toxic brownfield for the folks in Michigan City, and in that specific site, a lower income community, a largely Black and brown community to deal with. And this is, highly toxic, very carcinogen, all kinds of health problems. So we realized also with our legislative work that it might take years before anything happens at the state level. So we turned to EPA and IDEM and rallied and pestered. If I am one thing, it is tenacious. And we have gotten several meetings with EPA and IDEM. We're having an upcoming meeting with Region 5. This might be our 3rd meeting with EPA. Through our work, we were able to get the wall that's holding that toxic coal ash in We were able to get an inspection. We don't think that's enough. We want action. As Krista said, it's much cheaper to prevent than to fix. And it's the same across the board with this. So we are also our executive director, Ashley Williams, who actually made this beautiful slide display for us. She is part of the lawsuit against EPA. So we're in on that, suing the EPA because they are they're not following the rules for coal ash excavation, and they are leaving out all the older ponds. And what they're calling older ponds is anything from 2015 onward. So we're hopeful about that will get some movement. So let's move to the next slide, please. And this is just some of the activities that we have done in Northwest Indiana. On your left, we had a public health forum. The woman down at the bottom is Dr. Indra Frank. She is the Director of Health and Water Policy at the Hoosier Environmental Council. We have Pat Boy on our panel. We have the Northwest Indiana Ministers Conference and the Michigan City Common Council. We also lobbied the Michigan City Common Council, and they have worked closely with us. We have passed 3 unanimous resolutions. They want all of this completely removed. As you all know, a resolution is just making a strong declarative statement. It has really no teeth. That's why we're hoping the EPA actions will put a little more oomph in it. We have these signs up, Save Our Lake, across the Northwest Indiana region. We're hoping more folks will put those up. No NIPSCO coal ash. And we had a huge rally in August where people spoke. We packed City Council and they spoke from, I think it was 6 till 9. And the stories were compelling. Everyone spoke from the heart. And it was very invigorating to be a part of that. So let's go to the next slide, please. So how can you help? Oh my gosh. You can donate, you can volunteer with us, you can follow us on all our social media platforms. We are always looking for help, and here's where I'll spin all of our messages positively. It is go time, folks. It is all hands on deck, and one individual can make a tremendous amount of difference. So your presence at this event tonight is so powerful. And I hope that you will continue to choose one issue that you really want to focus on and hammer that. We really need every single person to be part of this effort if we are going to make a change, to speak up and speak out and speak for those who can't. You know, these environmental justice communities, folks are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're caring for an elderly relative or children. To be an activist is, in a way, it is a luxury. And if you have the capacity to give your time, to write a check, it is beholden upon us to really pitch in now and do some heavy lifting for those who can't. So let's go to the next slide, please. And these are all of our resources. If you want to learn more, this is just a wonderful synopsis of everything on coal ash in Michigan City and what we're doing, what can be done. We have a petition that we're going to be presenting to EPA. Gosh, you could sign that. It takes less than 30 seconds. All of these actions really make a difference. And with that, I will turn it over to our hosts with so much appreciation. Thank you so much for having me speak.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for presenting that information. Very important for Indiana. I'd just like to thank the speakers today and the Education Committee, and all of you have joined us today to learn a little bit more about some issues around Lake Michigan and Indiana. And there are 3 more that are coming up. You can check that out on our website. And I don't know, Joy, if you have anything else you'd like to say.
Yes, do we have any questions in the chat? I know we're over time, but for those who have
Well, we only had a question from Lisa and myself. So
Okay.
unless other people have some questions, I think Lisa and I could probably track down Susan or Kristen
Okay.
or you.
Very good, very good. And yes, I want to thank you for coming. And I also wanted to let you know that the people you heard today, except for Susan, who's a guest speaker, are all members of the Speakers Bureau. So if you need a program for your local league, we are willing to either come to you in person or via Zoom, and we welcome the opportunity to speak before your league. You just got a smattering of these presentations. There can be more detailed on any of these topics, and so we invite you to reach out to us. The full panoply of our Speakers Bureau offerings are on our website at lwvlmr.org. We encourage you to come to the subsequent presentations and come to our conference in person or on Zoom. It's going to be hybrid, October 21st, 22nd. And I also want to acknowledge that Pat Boy has joined us today, and Susan spoke about Pat's good work on coal ash, and we really appreciate you joining us today, Pat. And we appreciate all of you joining us. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it back over to Lisa to close the meeting.
Well, that's pretty much all we have. Thank you again for joining us. And just
Have a good evening.
have a great evening. Keep up the
Good
fight.
night. Thanks, everyone.